And I welcome you all joining us from different parts of the world. We kickstarted the conference yesterday with a very insightful pre-conference roundtable reflecting on the learnings and best practices from networks and associations in international education as India takes a step forward towards its own Indian network in international higher education. Today morning, we inaugurated the conference on interregional cooperation for effective internationalization of higher education, and we now begin with a series of tracks that will cover different facets of the regional coherence that is needed to integrate synergies through inter- and intra-regional cooperation to enhance internationalization of higher education initiatives. Before I proceed, I would quickly like to remind our audience who joined us today about two things. First is the open call for contributions for a special edition of a quarterly e-magazine, Symbiosis Express Intellect, which is based on the theme of the conference. If you are a researcher or a practitioner in international higher education working around fostering interregional cooperation, or if you know of someone working in this area, we would like to invite you and your colleagues to contribute articles, case studies, opinion pieces for the forthcoming 5th edition. You will find the link in the chat box, spelling out some guidelines in particulars to send in your contributions, and also the link for you to indicate your interest to contribute. We are also glad to share that the 2nd edition of our digital culinary book called The World Kitchen, which encapsulates more than 100 fusion recipes made by Indian and international students from 35 countries who participated in the Symbiosis e-Academies on Internationalization. These recipes are special because they're made by non-natives, where students engage in a virtual culinary exchange, helping the cultural others cook a non-native dish from the limited ingredients available in their dorms, homes, owing to lockdowns. You can request your free copy through the link in the chat box and try your hand at these simple international cuisines. Now we start with our first track of this conference, the need for advancing South-South-North dialogue in internationalization of higher education. This track is special because it sparked an interest within our community to look at examples of sharing the best practices that encompass the collaborative projects between the global South and North. The interest was piqued when our Pro-Chancellor, Dr. Vidya Yerovtekar, was invited to be the first chair of OBRIAL Global India chapter, initiating a dialogue on creating and fostering interregional cooperation, which was barely spoken about in this side of the world 2 years ago. Today, we'll be taking you through these impactful journeys, and I take great pleasure in welcoming our panelists and our go-to man, the chair of this track, Dr. Nicholas Petrichi. Dr. Petrichi is the director at OBRIAL Global Observatory in Spain. He holds an extensive experience in education management and international cooperation. He has worked broadly in higher education projects and regional integration initiatives in India, Oman, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. He has been in charge of the coordination of Alpha, Erasmus Mundus actions, Tempest projects, leading EU cooperation and research projects, and EU specialized actions in the field of international cooperation for more than 15 years now. Prior to Nicholas's appointment as a director at OBRIAL Global, he has been the director of the Observatory of Globalization at the University of Barcelona, the director of the University of Barcelona and Middle East College's Smart Knowledge Alliance based in Muscat and Oman, and has worked for University of Barcelona Secretariat, Arab European Conferences on Higher Education, offered in collaboration with European University Association and the Association of Arab Universities. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Nicholas. The platform is all yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here chairing this very interesting session. First note, apologies for not being able to use the official background. If I use official background, you will see a ghost and you will not see me, but there is something on the screen. So apologies for this. It's a real pleasure for OBRIAL Global to be working with Symbiosis, this extraordinary journey on supporting international education and internationalization of higher education, in particular from the perspective of interregionality. I will have a very difficult task today, which is to chair a discussion among three prominent friends and speakers, two of them member and foundational members of this interregional vision of Real Global. The first one, as you have already introduced, is Dr. Vidya. I think she needs no further introduction. She has been introduced probably several times. But what can I say? Dr. Vidya has been one of our main spirits in Real Global and main guide to try to bring India into this interregional perspective. So it's going to be a pleasure, Dr. Vidya, to be sharing with you this session. Professor Joshua Mok Kaho is the Vice President of the Lam San, Professor of Comparative Policy at the Lingang University in Hong Kong. It's a pleasure. I apologize if I am mispronouncing your name, Mr. Mok. And Dr. Juste is an old friend of mine. He's the director of the Southern African Regional University Association. He's also chairing or co-chairing the Real Global chapter in Africa. So when I was preparing the session and knowing that I had to make a very short introduction, after listening to the President of Symbiosis' inspirational speech, I was trying to think, how can I frame this session about South-South-North dialogue in higher education? He said the word is one family, which I find true. But as you know, families live in different places. And when they gather for a party, they tend to fight. So family is very nice if it is not on a Christmas Eve or whatever celebration in different countries and religions. Then you have the uncle fighting with the grandmother, etc., etc., etc. So the challenge is how we make this family talk and how we make this family a family that visits each other, understanding the differences between their members. In that spirit, I was checking some numbers, which I think are quite important to underline. Because in the inaugural speech, now I don't remember who said this, but we were talking about education as a tool to enhancing people, no? And to make people better and to be closer to our citizens. So education and citizenship has a link, and we are working to make our youth better and our youth able to build a better future. So I was trying to check very quickly the number of citizens of each country in the world. And when you check this, you realize that out of the 10 first countries, 5 countries with the most citizens are from Asia, 2 are from North America. One of the 2 is hardly considered a North American country, which is Mexico. 1 is from South America, 1 is bi-regional, Europe, Asia, which is Russia, and 1 is African. So when we discuss international higher education, we need to take into account this as well. The Southern North have been sharing many approaches, many discussions, and most of the time they have been taken from the North to the South. But when you put the people around the table, so when you start counting the members of this family, it is pretty clear that the South has something to say. And it is pretty clear that the discussion from the South has also need to consider the differences between these regions. I said 5 from Asia. Asia is a very big continent. India has 122 official languages, which is something that it is not always, 22 official languages out of 121 mother tongue languages. So the level of diversity is extraordinary. And this diversity needs to be understood and needs to be somehow underlined. If you put all the Indian population together next to the, still you will have more Indian citizens than all the citizens of the US and the European Union together. So during the pandemic, what we have been trying to do was try to, having this in mind, this demographic data in mind, which is extremely important because it shows the future of the youth, the future of our world, let's say, in terms of distribution of population. We started to try to make the exercise to stop thinking in global terms. To address the globe, you need to address the part of the globe first. And you can address the part of the globe from different point of views. And we started to do that, underlining the need to do that from the south to the north, the south to the south, the east to the west, and the east to the east, which is sometimes difficult to do. So if we have a challenge in front of us, a political, a moral, and an ethical challenge, I think is to make our youth connect to each other, knowing each other more, know our own system more, know our differences more, and exploding them for the best for the best of our youth. So many years the speech has been focused on North-South cooperation, then it went to to the global cooperation. Now we are talking about global North and global South, which we also find a little bit strange. I repeat, out of the 10 countries with more citizens, 5 from Asia, 2 from North America, 1 from South America, 1 from Africa. That is nothing like the global North or the global South. What we have are different regions, different countries with different perspectives, with some commonalities located in the South and located in the North, in the West, and in the East. And we should address those differences and work towards understanding each other better. So with this framework, I have prepared 3 elements that I would like our panelists to address. The first thing that I would like to know, or I would like you to address, is the role of your institution and your country/region in facilitating international dialogue, interregional dialogue. What you have been doing either during the pandemic or now, where we are in a sort of great pandemic zone, showing again the complexity and diversity of the world. In order to achieve this, and what specific challenges your countries and regions are facing in terms of advancing South-South-North dialogue. For example, what are the challenges to advance East-East dialogue, in particular from the Indian perspective. I also would like Nico Juste to give us some framework information about Africa and about the different regions and spaces of Africa or in Africa, and how inter-Africa cooperation is always and also a challenge. With these very difficult, I guess, general questions, we would also like the panelists to try to make some reference to institutional efforts. I know Symbiosis is making this conference is an example of an institutional effort to address these challenges, to offer bridges for students to walk them, for institutions to create links, to foster non-traditional mobility, to look for funding alternatives. I would say what our institutions are doing to achieve this, as I said before, political, moral, and ethical challenge of building South-South, South-North, East-West bridges. As Dr. Mock is the only one in this table which is not an overall global member, and apologizing to Vidya for my lack of, not to be a gentleman of giving you the floor first as the only lady here. But let me give the floor first to Dr. Mock, and then we'll go immediately to you, Dr. Vidya, if you agree. Thank you very much. Dr. Mock, your first 5-7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for having me to join this interesting and exciting dialogue. And I think I, as a researcher in higher education, going through the unprecedented global health crisis in the last 2 years or so, has been a very humbling experience. So such humbling experience would draw me to some sort of conclusion that I think we need to have more collaboration and cooperations across different parts of the world. And simply based upon the COVID pandemic, and even world-class scientists and medical professionals, public administrators, and no single body would be able to resolve the problem without reaching out to learn from each other, because we are living in one family. I certainly agree with Nicholas. We are living in family, but people living in different parts of the globe as a global family. So I think this humbling experience is not only for educators and researchers, but more importantly, I think world leaders should come together to humble themselves, to work together to find better solutions, not only solving about the public health related crisis, but also development issue that we are talking today about higher education. So I'm very humbled by the experience. Today, I would like to share with you about the system that I myself come from and more familiar, because the more comparative work I've conducted, I must confess, the more I do not know. And just like a student in primary level, trying to do more research to know more about development around the world. And no matter how we think about the impact of globalization, I think no one can deny we are significantly influenced by globalization. And for me, globalization is a process which allowed us to rethink about ourselves and let us know more about our major differences. And understanding we are different is important, number one. But more importantly, in what way we can make use of education to make people know they are different and we are different. But at the same time, to enable people, especially young people, to appreciate the difference and embrace diversity. So living in East Asia, I think this is interesting when you look into what happens in East Asia when we are talking about development trends. I would like to highlight a few. Number one, I think the growth is very unprecedented. The growth of educational infrastructure is supported by expanding economic capacities in East Asia, in particular like Singapore, the SAR, Special Administrative Region of China, like Hong Kong and Macau, and Taiwan, China, South Korea now have per capita incomes at Western European levels. And one of the major giant economy in East Asia, China's per capita income exceeds the world average, and the average income and tertiary participation are lower in Vietnam and Mongolia. So the regional review shows about tertiary participation of school leaver age cohort, as indicated by UNESCO gross enrollment ratio, have reached almost universal levels in some of the selected countries or regions in East Asia, like South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan. And in China, in the last few decades, it has reached from 4%, 3-4 decades before, up to 58%, though much higher in the eastern regions. And in 1990s, East Asia and the Pacific was well below the world average, 14%, but in 2020, EAP 51% was well above the world average of 40%. So this kind of growth of higher education is really welcoming, because massification of higher education is carried by both public and private sectors. And in particular, I think a lot of families and individuals, they have contributed to higher education development by enrolling their kids into higher education. And not only about the quantitative growth, but in terms of quality, some of the measures, international measures like the PISA, the school performance at 15 years in math, science, and reading, has indicated East Asia, particularly in Singapore, Shanghai, and Hong Kong, they are leading the world in PISA. And this kind of growth triggers quality, employability, and equity issue in the region. For example, I think the China and also East Asia and Singapore together produce more people, not only in number. But the second trend I want to highlight is about quality in science and STEM subjects. And China, East Asia, and Singapore together produce more global science papers than Europe, and are on track to exceed North America and Europe combined. So it explains why when President Obama was in his office, he also wondered about the US should invest more in education and pointing out about the potential impact of the rise of China's in science. And the total R&D spending in East, Southeast, and South Asia is almost half the world total. So, for example, in 2020, China published over 69,000 papers, Japan about 100,000, South Korea 79,000, Taiwan 28,000. I won't go into all detail, but the number shows you the rapid growth is driven by not only in private investment, but the state investment. Mongolia has no indigenous science system as yet, but science proper output in Vietnam has also started to grow very rapidly. So this regional survey can indicate about the rise of science and STEM-related subjects. And in 2018, China had over 380,000 doctoral students, Japan 80,000, South Korea more than 74,000. And across the region, there's a notable trend focusing on more physical sciences like STEM, and these disciplines that lead university in China and Singapore excel. Just Tsinghua University is now the world leader in the production of high citation science, mathematics, and computing, and in total STEM fields, including engineering, ahead of MIT. But I want to make a point here, based upon the data about the rise of science, and also international collaboration, international publication has also indicated much stronger regional collaboration among ASEAN universities and the Big Three. The Big Three, we are talking about Korea, Japan, and China. So my recent research sponsored by British Council examining about UK university in partnership of ASEAN and the Big Three definitely shows about, in terms of publication, in terms of research collaboration, in terms of the mobile of students in the region is on the rise. So I think regionalization of higher education is in the making, especially in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, when many Asian students, particularly Chinese students, could not go for afar in the traditional Western democracy or economies. And given the condition about the new geopolitics, which has significantly or even adversely affecting relationship across nations, higher education collaboration is also cannot immune from being impacted by this kind of international relations. So because today we are talking about the importance about inter-regional collaboration and cooperation, I think I just draw the audience attention to the two trends I just outlined above. And before the crisis took place, we've already seen more collaboration among ASEAN and also the Big Three. And I would like to call upon more collaboration and more collaboration in the region, because I think Asian scholars are allowed, they are competent enough with the increase of more qualified PhD among all these selected East Asian countries. But at the same time, we have to look about the issue when we are talking about, when we celebrate about the success of expansion, the rise of science in Asia, but we have to look at that there's also intensifying problem in terms of education equality. Because not every individual or family or not all countries in the region would have the same level of state support together with private or non-government funding support to enable their young people to go on further studying in higher education, doing serious international research. So I would like to thank the organizer by organizing this very important symposium for us to rethink about in what way we can go beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. And we want to echo the importance about collaboration and cooperations, because through cooperation and collaboration, we truly understand people, we are different, but in what way we can embrace diversity, and in what way we can put all our wisdom, our brains together for resolving problem and issue being identified. They are becoming hugely and increasingly complex, confronted world leaders in education. So Chair, thank you. I just want to make a remark here I will welcome further conversation and dialogue with our colleagues, the speaker, and also the audience. Thank you very much, Nicholas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mock, for this wonderful first intervention and for underlining the trends in Eastern Asia, which I guess are similar than trends in different parts of the world where the population is growing. Challenges of quality and quantity, to put it in this way, are important to address and to open the opportunity and the invitation to look for further cooperation east or in Asia. I would add the importance to also look at cooperation between Africa, Asia, South America, Asia, to create a bloc from where similar challenges can find different solutions, but the common spirit. And from there build up a much more, let's say, strong interregional or international dialogue, respecting and embracing the diversity, as you were saying, as a core value. In this sense, I know that it was presented in this conference. India has approved in 2020 a new NEP pushing internationalization or putting internationalization on the table, pushing Indian universities to internationalize and to start looking at international partners from the West, from the South, and from the East. And in this sense, I know Dr. Vidya has been a strong advocate of East-East cooperation and to place India as also a major actor in Asia and as also a major actor in the dialogue with Asia. And why not as a bridge between East Asia and the more, let's say, Western South, if I can put it in this way. Dr. Vidya, your 7 minutes of your first intervention. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicholas. And I think it's a very important topic that we've brought in today for the discussions on how do you advance South-South-North dialogues. And I would give the whole credit to Obrial and Nicholas on this very public platform. I must thank you and Professor Raman for actually opening my mind towards a concept called South-South-North dialogue. You know, we in India or otherwise in Asia would always look at unidirectional collaborations. And most of the times, if you look at, you know, the 1,000 universities in India and probably just about 20% of them really ahead in internationalization, you will see that most of the Indian universities have collaborations with the North or with the European universities or with UK or US. And even if you look at the history of collaborations, you know, it's always been unidirectional from the South to the North. And probably it could be that developing countries want to see what developed countries' universities are doing, how they are functioning, and what is it that, you know, they can imbibe or they can learn from the best practices of the Northern universities or the global North. But since the time I've been interacting with Obrial and chairing the Obrial Global India chapter, as I say, my mind really opened to even having a South-South dialogue. I think distances really kept us away. When we spoke about Africa, whether it was South Africa, and when we started interacting with Dr. Nico, or whether we started interacting with South America, Latin America through FAUBI, we realized that there are friends back there who we can actually talk probably, you know, more comfortably than with friends in the North. And that's exactly when we decided that can we look at, you know, creating a corridor between India, Africa, South America. And imagine this corridor being so long and so robust of excellent institutions that we have, excellent best practices that we carry, that we can not just handhold ourselves, but also, you know, provide some best practices of this part of the world to our global North partners. And that's when really even the confidence level rose. Nico, many a times people in developing countries, when I say people, it means people who represent institutions and universities in developing countries are kind of intimidated with the global North, you know, are kind of intimidated with universities from the West or from the global North. And that's when it's always a relationship of a recipient and a donor, then really partners. And I think Obrial has really opened these doors to even opening the minds of people to say that here you come together as partners and not really recipient and donors. And I think this is an important finding or feeling that at least personally I have got, and I'm sure many of my Indian partners who are in these dialogues have got, where we can actually talk one-on-one to people from either the global south or the global north as if we are partners. Till now, it was always unidirectional. Even if you look at the mobility of Indian students, and I'd like to quote some figures, if you look at the figures in January 2021, more than 1 million Indian students studied outside, and more than 50% of these Indian students studied in North America. About 200,000 students studied in Canada, and maybe more than 36,000 students studied in UK. And this is a data that I've just picked up. Maybe 25,000 students in Germany. And now, of course, the number of students in Australia, Indian students in Australia, are rising to 92,000 students in Australia and about 30,000 students in New Zealand. But how many of our Indian students are really seen in Africa or in countries of South America? Is it because the institutions there are not so great? Is it that the institutions there are probably equal to us? And is it always that institutions and universities up there in the north or the global north are better than those in India? I think it's just a change of mindset. So it is these kind of platforms that really help in bringing the north-south-south collaborations. And fortunately, I would say that this pandemic, because of the virtual presence of all of us, have brought us much closer than what we would have come closer if it was physical conferences like these. I'll just give you an example of my dialogues with Nico, and I'm sure Nico Joost from South Africa will also make a mention of this. And we were discussing on this whole concept of diversity and what really internationalization is for. And Dr. Muzumdar very eloquently established this whole concept of internationalization leading to globalization of minds. And this is exactly what Nico and I thought. And therefore, I felt at that point in time that if two thinkers or two academicians across South, are thinking about the same, concept, can we really come together and work? And that's when we decided that let us come together and look at what do African students really think when they, look at mobility, and what do Indian students really think when they look at mobility. Is it that when we have foreign students in India, it benefits those foreign students? Or is it that it benefits our own Indian students as well? So no matter from which countries or from which, whether they're from the global south or the global north, that really shouldn't matter. What should matter is the diversity that you bring into the Indian classrooms, so that it just doesn't benefit the students who come from abroad, but really it benefits our own Indian students, or I would say any host country Indian students. So it is this whole concept of diversity and inclusiveness that should be really brought in dialogues of internationalization, then really looking at what is it that one can get from the other. When we speak about partnerships, it also has to be symbiotic partnerships or a win-win to both. And that's when you look at this whole corridor of South-South, and of course getting also the North in this whole dialogue, when we will speak about how it is beneficial, how it is symbiotic to each one of us, then really, just becoming the winner and the other becoming a recipient of what the other one is really giving you. Same as with research. I mean, when we really look at the problems that we have in our country, there could be the same problems in Africa. And I'm sure there could be problems that are hunted by some of the European academicians to find solutions to. So with these kind of dialogues, you also bring in faculty members, closer to each other to just discuss these problems that are so rampant in our countries, and whether the developed countries, can really help us to find solutions. And that's when really joint research starts developing. So it is so much that, is a win-win for all of us, not just students, but even academia, when we bring in, the South, North universities or institutions together. The third is, of course, networks and the immense work that networks can do. I just mentioned how global, Obrial Global has opened my mind, and I'm sure minds of several others who are members of the Obrial Global. But similarly, other networks like the Indian network that is being conceptualized and now implemented, the Indian Network for International Higher Education, or the ANI, or the FAUBI. There are so many such networks that actually can bring in such dialogues. And in these networks, honestly, it doesn't really matter from which area you belong to or from which continent you belong to. It's about like-minded people coming together, discussing issues, and finding solutions too. Now, coming back to our university, what have we done? The whole foundation of this university has been believing that the world is one family. So we don't even believe on advancement of dialogues between South, South and North. We believe in the whole global concept of believing that the world is one family. But as an institution, we concentrated not really on students who came from the West or Europe or America or UK, but concentrated on students who came from the Afro-Asian continents. And why? Because we felt that as much as our students require quality education, students from these parts of the world also require quality education. And probably in our country, we can not just provide quality education, but we could provide quality education at an affordable cost. And that's when, foreign students from Afro-Asian countries started coming into our university, coming into our city, and actually coming into our country. And that's when, once that started happening, we also started looking at whether the students from the North are also interested in coming to India. And surprisingly, there was a huge interest of students from Europe, UK, and US in India, because they wanted to come and see probably how Indian businesses work, how Indian mythological concepts work, about yoga and meditation, and several other things that they were interested in. And when we started then getting in the students from the North, I think we provided a platform for dialogue between South, South, and North right on the university campuses. And I'm sure these kind of experiments in other parts of the world will also help in these dialogues between North, South, South, advancement of higher education. So I'll stop here, Nicholas. I can go on and on with experiences that I've had at a personal level and at an institutional level, but I'll wait for others to speak and then maybe have some questions from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vidya, and thank you for your mention to your experience at Obrera Global. Let me tell you that Obrera Global is a collective construction, it's an association of association of different institutions. So it is not that it is. I'm glad that we inspire you, but you have inspired us. So the inspiration has been mutual. We probably wouldn't be able to build any narrative without the support of you and all of the other members. But you were mentioning there, I guess, and I'm sure certain points that are important in the need to foster this South-South dialogue and the importance of building bridges. That it is a humble, no, it seems to be a humble objective, but actually very relevant and very important. And then I was trying to think how to materialize this and what are the challenges there. And I came up with three discussions that we are probably addressing in this conference and we will need to address in the future. The first one is multilingualism, how to speak the language of the citizens. I was reading today, India never stops to fascinate me. 22 official languages, 121 mother tongue languages. So what is the language that we need to speak, or don't we have the obligation to speak our citizens in their language? That because you and me and Nico and Dr. Monk and all of us, we can gather in a hotel in New York and speak in English and discussing, or in Bangalore or whatever. But there is territoriality there as well, and there is a responsibility towards to embrace diversity. Second one is, you were mentioning research, open science versus open access, or the combination between open access and open science. How to start thinking science as a collective open exercise. And there are a lot of lessons from the pandemic. The discussion about patents and intellectual property is something that probably South-South cooperation is to put on the table, or we put on the table soon, and the discussion of open access as well. Access to what, where the information, in which language this information is done. And the third one is mobility and internationalization that you were mentioning very well. When you see the number of population in India and China, Japan, Nigeria, Indonesia, etc., and the flows of mobility, something is not, at least from an objective point of view, something is wrong there. And we need to work certainly in a cultural change, in building up a new language. In this new language, Africa now is playing a central role because it had become a sort of a point of attraction. Everybody is looking at Africa. Everybody is looking at Africa for many different reasons and in many different ways. And if there is a country or a region in Africa, sorry, that represents the complexity and diversity of African history and the situation is the south of Africa. There are at least, let me count, I don't want to make any mistake, but at least 4 or 5 principal languages from Afrikaans to Zulu is spoken in Southern Africa, going through French, English, German, etc. So Nico, if you can give us now the opportunity to learn in 7 minutes the positions and experiences of Africa in general and Southern African and South Africa in particular, that would be great. And then we will probably have the time to have 1 or 2 questions from the audience to enrich the discussion. Nico, thanking Dr. Vidya once again. Nico, your 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Vidya, for inviting me again to be on this panel. And I nearly joined late because I wanted to make sure that my background was the right one, and I couldn't get it working. So that was why I nearly was late. But it's a pleasure for me to be here and to not waste the time. The whole notion of South-South collaboration has been on my mind for many years, where I was practicing internationalization, and I think we must never forget the theoretical background from where South-South collaboration actually originated. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, and the audience and everybody who's interested could go and find some of the theories of that. There's an institute in India that actually have done a lot of work on South-South collaboration, and I've actually been using a lot of their work. But you know, South-South collaboration, the foundations of that was in 1955 with the Bandung Conference, and the Bandung Conference was a conference of heads of state of newly independent states, which included India, Egypt, and a number of the major states that gained independence after the Second World War. And that gave South-South collaboration a foundation, and from that it grew into different ways that it found itself globally. And I think if we step back and just look at where we are today, over time, a number of formal networks at national levels was created, the South-South one, and there are a number of them. Those that are relating to South Africa and Southern Africa. The 2 that I want to highlight is the first one, which Vidya, I think we actually saw there was an opportunity which we all missed, and that was the so-called IPSA, India, Brazil, South Africa. It was a very active network. Universities started to collaborate, and it became and it created the space for collaboration. Of course, then BRICS arrived, which superseded IPSA, and I don't think BRICS is that active at the moment for different reasons. But out of all of this, we've actually created formal structures at governmental level. Universities followed the national governments, or was asked to follow the national government's policies, and worked in the South-South domain. Whether that is whether that is the recipe for success, I'm not so sure. I think universities have always been more successful in finding their own partners, and building that relationship. And I will conclude, Nico, by stating how I think we should take this forward. But if we then bring this closer to South Africa, given the background of South Africa, at Bandung, 1955, South Africa was actually the one that was pointed at and said one of the principles of Bandung was in South-South collaboration, there should be a whole host of values, and one of them was not to see racial discrimination, which in 1955 was apartheid was actually then just getting roots in South Africa. If we come to where we are now, and I want to jump right forward to 2014. I was fortunate over my time in international education to be in the spaces where NAFSA and that means where the North dominates international discourse, NAFSA, the EIE, and so forth. And some of my friends from the South, and there I want to specifically say for my, we started to ask the question, how do we increase South collaboration, but how do we also, instead of just talking about collaboration, how do we position ourselves that the South begin to set the agenda jointly with the North? And I think when we talk about South-South-North collaboration, that is an important point of departure. We from the South should be seen as equals in setting the agenda. What happened was in 2014, we challenged the world to the global dialogue, which happened in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. And I always, when I explain the dialogue, all the organizations that represented 82% of all international students in the world, that means about 4 million, participated in the dialogue. There were 34 organizations, which led to the Nelson Mandela Bay Declaration. It is still available. It's on the websites and so forth. That declaration, Nico and colleagues, clearly stated how we should collaborate with each other. And one of those elements was and that's a value-based element, which I pushed for, was the one that I am because of you. The Ubuntu element or value, which says that I will only, when I participate and when I join, when I sign an agreement, I do it not for myself, but for the other. And I think if we move into this very difficult global situation where we are right now, if we move away from the self to the other, I think collaboration will look totally differently. Now, just for the last 2 minutes about collaboration in Africa and Southern Africa. Of course, Africa is a continent, and the collaboration is largely regional. So Africa is defined in the Southern African region, the bloc, which is called SADC, the East African bloc. There's a formal organization in East Africa, which it's now 6 or 7 countries that are part of that. SADC is 16 countries. Then you have the West African bloc and North Africa. Now, North Africa normally associates itself with the Middle East. West Africa is a bit of a diverse space, and therefore there's another group that normally gets added when collaboration is defined, and that's the French African, which is more, it's not only Central Africa, but it's all the French African francophone countries. So if you look at at Africa as such, it's a complex environment, and if you want to see South-South collaboration working in Africa, then it starts at regional level. And just to illustrate that, Southern Africa, if you look at student mobility, South Africa is probably the country with the most, currently with the most international students, although it's declining. the majority of the students comes from Southern Africa, and then also from East and West Africa. So of the about 60,000 international students in South Africa, 80% are from Africa. The other 20% are a little bit from the East, virtually none from South America, and then from Europe and America, the rest. So if we talk about collaboration, South-South, what did South Africa do to promote that? We have just published in 2020 our new internationalization policy. I was fortunate to be involved in writing the policy. In the policy, we clearly, which is a guideline to universities, part of the policy which defines partnerships, the government advised the universities to firstly look at Southern Africa, Africa, BRICS, developing world, and then the North. So the government has already said that if we put funding together or make funding available for partnerships, this is the priority list of countries or regions where we must go. Now, I'm not saying that must happen all over, but I do think that if we want to see South-South collaboration, what Vidya said is absolutely true. The default is always the North. Why is it? There's funding coming from the North. And funding, you know that there's not a lot of funding for partnerships from from our own countries, and therefore where the funding comes from, that's where the partnerships are. And it's not normally where the heart goes, but it is where the funding is. So in conclusion, Nico, it is absolutely necessary that we start these, or that we have these debates amongst ourselves, South-South, but that we also bring the North in. And you know that, and I'm not going to repeat what Vidya said about Obrel as the platform from where we operate, but it's for us already a South-South-North engagement sitting with Obrel. And I think it's a very good example on how South-South-North collaboration can actually enhance South-South collaboration, because you the platform, you become the space where we meet, but we can also talk to each other bilaterally, and the triangle and bilateral conversations, to me, is what we should take forward. The 7 minutes is up, I know. So thank you for the time, and we will hopefully we have questions and we can engage further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nico, for this first round of comments. Thank you so much once again for the mention to Obrel Global, which it's a self-mention, because you are Obrel Global, not Obrel Global. Once again, only exists because of its members. So it only exists because all of you, and we are very, very happy to facilitate this debate. But you were mentioning some point that I had in my notes before going to some of the questions that the participants posted, which is the question of funding. I just want to give some very rough figure that Professor Mock, I apologize, I know I cannot compare this, but it's just to give an idea. I apologize because Professor Mock didn't mention he's an expert in comparative educational policy. I just been checking now the budget of Erasmus Plus program for the period 2021-2027. It is 26 billion euros. So more or less 10 billion euros per year, something. I'm sorry, 0.5 billion euros per year. I checked the budget of the Argentine Minister of Education. It is 80 million euros. That explains quite a lot. I know you cannot compare the European Union with one country, but Argentina is one of the countries in the G20. So I don't know. My point is, if I add up the budgets of it, and it is the 6% of the Argentine GDP. So that explains quite a lot, and that explains quite a lot of difficulties and the domination in the agenda. My feeling is that, Nico, it is not only about being part of a global agenda, it's how we're our own agenda. During the last years, we have been discovering that there is no such a South-South agenda. Very easy. Like last year in December, we organized with Symbiosis and Faubai a series of discussions on internet. It was the first time that this happened. So pandemic, if we have to take the good sense out of the disaster that the world suffered during the last 2 or 3 years, was that they gave the opportunities to establish these dialogues, these exchanges in a, let's say, low-cost manner. So we discovered virtual mobility as a tool. We discovered that internationalizing existing curricula can be done online. We discovered many things. So I think it is time not only to build up a global agenda where the South has a voice, but have a South-South agenda, as Dr. Mock was saying. And maybe the first that doesn't exist. It's very difficult to find a common South-South agenda for many, many reasons. Geopolitics now are making this even more complicated for countries, even more difficult. People are thinking how the world will be divided, but I think universities have a responsibility. And in this sense, one of the questions that our audience has made, it has to do with the institutional efforts to pursue alternative partnership, let's say. And what the institutions that are represented in this panel are actually doing, very humbly from their own, but that might represent a change in the institutional policies, a first step that it is needed. So the first, I will repeat the round. Dr. Mock, your time to give us some reflection about the discussion, the different presentations, but mainly what is your institution doing to pursue an alternative partnership, let's say, that can break or can offer an alternative path for international cooperation?
Thank you very much for asking. I think I see a few chat questions and comments. It's really useful. So talking about North-South collaboration, I think Hong Kong and also my country, China, have long been thinking about in what way we can promote more collaboration across different parts of the world, particularly offering some sort of financial incentive, like setting up scholarships for recruiting and attracting students from the South. And Hong Kong in the last 10 years has been promoting about the Hong Kong PhD fellowship scheme, which is hugely competitive, open for students all around the world. And not surprisingly, a lot of high quality applicants coming from the southern part of the world, including Africa and also Latin America, be attracted to join Hong Kong universities for doing their PhD programs. And the university system in Hong Kong, we have 8 public universities. We are tiny because we're only about 7.5 million citizens. But given this big 8, we've been using the resources from the government and non-government sources funding by creating more learning opportunity for attracting students from overseas to come to Hong Kong, and especially from the southern part of the world. But at the same time, we also send out students, from the north to reach out to other countries in the south and also the north. But if you are talking about the student choices, we see more and more students. I can say about my university, we have over 250 partners around the world across 40, 50 regions and countries. And students would have the choice to go on the exchange program or learning experience elsewhere for reaching out to know the world. But why we have to do that? Because we have to find resources for supporting the student to know about the world. Number one, I agree with you. When you open the session today, internationalization is also about global citizenship. And Hong Kong being a global city, I think we have to ask ourselves quite carefully in what way the education system itself would prepare our students becoming caring leader with global vision. So sending out students, recruiting students from overseas, and give them the kind of interactions. That sort of interactions and exchange would enable the locals to know more about the world, and through experiential learning elsewhere would be very helpful for making them more caring about the world. But I don't want to go on, but I just wonder, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, even though many faculty members at the beginning were not prepared for online learning, but now we are more used to use of the technology in informing teaching and learning. So in response to Nicholas, your question, internationalization should not be only talking about before the COVID, and in what way we can creatively make use of the online platform or modern technology in building internationalization at home, or using the virtual environment for promoting exchange and facilitating conversation and dialogue across different parts of universities. So I think we are very keen to reach out to university institutions, because we can hopefully do away from the impact of ideology or geopolitical influence. Because working with institutions or the leader from institutions across the world with the like mind, we can create the opportunity by using the modern technology for facilitating conversation. This sort of conversation is extremely important, because we want to make sure our students, they are open-minded, they appreciate about the differences, but at the same time, they embrace diversity. And let us work together, because I think we are mindful about the digital divide, but for resources, right? For those systems that are rich enough in resources, could offer support to the less fortunate systems with the modern technology, like online courses, online recorded webinars, teaching material, online recorded lecture or seminar. I think it's all doable, but we have to look for institutions across regions to work together for co-producing the environment which is conducive cooperation and collaboration. I think the new technologies could give us a lot of opportunity, but I don't want to overstate, because we are mindful about the digital divide. When we are trying to say about digitization of higher learning today, and at the same time, we also be mindful about some of the less developed economies may not be able to have the same level of support. So in what way the fortunate ones would reach out to the South, or less fortunate ones working together in supporting the UN SDG quality education, inclusive education. I think Hong Kong and my country, China, would be more than happy to reach out, because we are so, as I mentioned in my opening remark, it's truly humbling experience. We have to learn from each other. I echo to Rita, as I said, we have to identify good practices, not necessarily in the developed world. A lot of indigenous practices and knowledge coming from global South, and we have like law and haven't given sufficient attention to. And let's work together. And for my university, we are more than happy to engage in conversation and find appropriate method for facilitating conversation and dialogue. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you so much. I like very much your point about indigenous knowledge. We do need to believe in ourselves first, and in our capacities and knowledge and different sources of knowledge. Dr. Vidya, your 2 minutes to react about institutional challenges on how Symbiosis is doing this already by hosting this wonderful conference, but probably we are doing more things. So let us know in 2-3 minutes, what are you doing? What are your thoughts?
Yes, Nicholas. So I'll just be very short and crisp. So actually, it's at 3 levels that we really work. So one is at an institutional level. The other is at, of course, the level of the students, and the third one at the level of the faculty. So at an institutional level, we obviously started off in 50 years ago, mainly for Afro-Asian students. So the whole agenda at that point in time was also inclusiveness, diversity, and focus on the Afro-Asian students. But very categorically, we've started 2 centers. One, which is the Symbiosis Center for European Studies, because there was a focus and a large number of collaborations that we had with European universities. We had a lot of dialogue with networks like that. We were a part of the Erasmus. So we thought with this, we should kind of encourage this further. And then through the Center for European Studies that Nidhi heads, we've also started certain courses. We involved European students in e-academies, internships. Right now, even through the pandemic, they were very, very deeply engaged, and otherwise they are physically on the campus. So our dialogue with North, is institutionalized through the Symbiosis Center for European Studies. Likewise, tomorrow we're launching the Symbiosis India Australia Studies Center. Again, a focus where, we are in conversations, in dialogues, in partnerships with Australian universities. Can we move this further? Can we encourage more dialogues, more or deeper dialogues and conversations, dual programs, doing joint research and so on? Again, bringing one of our southern partners closer to us. So these are, as I said, very institutionalized things that we've done. The third is we run a school for international relations. So we have a general international relations program, but this year we started a focused MA Masters in African Studies. Again, to find out, because we found out through our own research that there is a lot of work that is required to be done in Indian, diplomatic circles on Africa, and to produce capacity or build capacity in this area of African studies, because again, the Indian government is now looking at Africa very closely. So I won't go into those geopolitical, issues and relations, but these are things that we've done at an institutional level. At the level of students, we have a global immersion program where we provide scholarships for students to go abroad and study. We will consciously now also look at whether this global immersion program can be focused on our South-South partners. Maybe would students want to go to South America, Latin America, to South Africa? So that is what we will probably now look at. But another program for students is Engage Africa, where we provide scholarships specifically for African students and students from the neighborhood of India, so the neighboring countries around India. And this is again a very focused scholarship program that is provided so that we get students from these countries as well, because we believe that when these students pass out, they become unofficial ambassadors of goodwill, not just for our university, but for our country as such. And then at the level of the faculty, we have faculty exchange programs through our collaborative partners, but we would like to certainly engage our faculty to faculty interactions more in the South-South-North dialogues, because that is something that we haven't done. And as you said, what is the challenge? I think this is our biggest challenge. A challenge is this, because when you look at faculty mobility, it requires a lot of funding, because it's not just teaching, but generally this mobility also involves a lot of research work. So I'll stop here and then.
Thank you very much, Vidya. Indeed, while you were talking, I was thinking in one particular element that I was born and I studied my undergraduate in Argentina. Then I moved to Europe, so I am half and half. No? And I remember that where the best library on Latin America is in the world, in the Ibero-American Institute in Berlin. So many Argentines are going to Berlin to study themselves, which is quite ridiculous. It's a good thing for Berlin, but when you think it objectively, people are leaving the region. Do you know where the complete collection of all the Argentine newspaper is? In Harvard Library. Again, we need to change our mindsetting. We need to change our institutional capacities. We need to believe probably more in ourselves and offering our faculty, our researchers, the possibility to come to our countries and to learn our knowledge and to share it. Because at the end of the day, it is important. The North has been doing this for centuries. And we are missing the opportunity to build up an agenda using digitalization, fostering flexibilization of learning. Dr. Yuste, I know you are not representing here an university, so it might be difficult for you to explain what an institution is doing, but maybe in 2 minutes, you can give us a little picture of what SADC is doing in order to help universities to collect data to decide on international institutional policy, as in SADC there is a very interesting project going on data collection for policy analysis that Dr. Juste is leading. So Nico, if in 2-3 minutes you can give us an idea what is going on in Southern Africa to foster this approach objectively with data, that would be great.
Good. Thank you, Nico. Before I do that, for 20 years I did run a university's internationalization, and I just want to share for a minute what I did. For the last 3 years, I've retired from that position, and I'm doing other work. But what there were some comments made, and in the chat there was questions asked. When I was asked to start the internationalization of the then University of Port Elizabeth, that later on became the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University, one of the big issues was it was seen to be one of the little universities in South Africa and not that well known. And how do you internationalize a space that is not well known? And I saw that on the question in the chat box. What we did was we had to take policy, made clear policy on how to do it, and then made it a comprehensively part of the university's activities at all levels, firstly. Secondly, what we did was, and that came to how did we promote it? We annually set aside a part of our budget for internationalization, for engagement with the South. And therefore, I had separate budget to send staff to universities in Africa. We've sent staff to universities in India, Vidya, not your university, but we did, and to universities in Brazil, and then thirdly, what we also did was we enhanced the research capacity through the separate budget, South, to look at, and what Professor Mock was talking about, the collaborative research and the publications, joint publications of staff in South, but with a specific goal, and that was to look at Indigenous knowledge and how Indigenous knowledge could enhance global thinking of whether it was diabetes or whatever the case may be. So that's just in short. I believe a university needs to have clear policy, look at it comprehensively, and then put money to it. Unfortunately, many universities don't put their own money into internationalization. They only wait for other money to come in. I believe if you really want to be seen to be an internationalized university, you need to put some of your own money into the space. Just from the data point of view, Nico, it's a very exciting project, colleagues. One of the big issues, of course, is if you don't know what the higher education sector in a region or in a space look like, you wouldn't be able to address the Sustainable Development Goals. You wouldn't know how to address the economic development, regional economic development, or even continental economic development. Now, unfortunately, at this moment, if you ask anybody in the world how many students are studying in Africa, there is not a clear answer and a specific answer. The closest would be UNESCO data, which is very outdated and not reliable. So we in SADC started the project, the SADC ministers meeting, started the project to do a mapping of higher education in SADC. Simultaneously, Obriel had a project which is called HAQUA, HAQUA 1, HAQUA 2, and then they discovered through that there isn't data, and they through that the policy development unit for data was created. So what we are currently doing is we are developing we are in the project development stage to collect in a very specific manner data on higher education in Southern Africa, but also in Africa. The data, but there's a whole host of policies that needs to play in this space. Of course, the policies are on current, what are the data policies at national level? And now SADC alone, there's 16 countries. So if you want to have a single data collection project, you need to engage with the 16 different national governments on that. So we at the moment busy with that. Hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have a very clear, I had a meeting yesterday with one of my colleagues at Obrel, with Elizabeth, on where we are on this in this project. And it's what was exciting for me the last 3 weeks. We were starting to getting data from different countries, and all of a sudden, you could see now what's the complexity of receiving data from. In the Southern African case, from Mauritius, from Namibia, from Botswana, and South Africa. If you put it all in one pot, what do? We need to find we need to develop translation mechanisms to translate the data into understandable method and so forth. So now, what's the good of this? For internationalization, I can just say to you, colleagues, the intra-Africa mobility, we don't even know. Now, when Professor Mock was talking about Asia, I think it would be very interesting to see what's the intra-Asian mobility at the moment, and how does that shape the thinking and the higher education outcomes, etc. So for us, it's important to have the data and then start producing the research thereafter.
So
thank you, Nico.
Thank you. I know there are many questions in the chat box, many questions in the Q&A box, many questions that will not remain unanswered because the panelists will probably have the chance to answer you in writing. Just to wrap up, 2 things looking at the future: importance of setting up an agenda that considers all the elements from a perspective of the South and from a perspective of the East, let me put it in this way, to engage a broader international dialogue. Understanding the importance of indigenous knowledge seems to be critical. Designing policies based on reliable data. This is something that sometimes, as I was mentioning the issue of the Ibero-American Library of the Ibero-American Institute of Berlin, sometimes the data is not in our hands to understand our own situation. We do need to have an agenda. This is probably the first step. Dr. Vidya and the Indian Global Chapter in Symbiosis University, together with the Indian University Association, are leading the efforts in India. And we hope to continue in this journey with all of you. Thanking you all once again. We could discuss this forever. Let me finalize with one note and one invitation. As you know, the World Higher Education Conference organized by UNESCO is taking place in Barcelona, where we are based. I am at the moment in Barcelona. So I know some of you will be probably be in Barcelona the week of the conference. Please do not hesitate to reach out and we can have a coffee conversation. We will probably offer some spaces to continue this conversation in Barcelona that, let me say, has been traditionally a city that have welcomed or a point of encounter between the East and the West. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. See you in Barcelona.
We are on time. Thank you so much.
Dr. Vidya, Dr. Jules, and Professor Joshua, for taking us through your journeys and creating that ecosystem with space of indigenous knowledge, belief in self, advancing South-South-North dialogues and higher education. Now we'll take a 10 minutes break and resume the next track on advancing interregional cooperation in IHE from an East-East and ASEAN